Well, we have a big September coming up. Some of you know, last week our leadership team meets for our annual leadership retreat, and this time it was a staycation. We didn't go anywhere. We stayed here in LA. But we did a lot of planning, kind of set up the whole year. Lots of information will be coming out to you guys. But September is going to be a big month. We're going to do a membership push coming up. Some of you have been part of our church for a long time, but have never been members. And you might wonder, what does that even mean? What does it look like? What is the commitment there? So we're going to have opportunities to learn about that. We're going to celebrate our 5-year anniversary in this building, which is nuts to think about, that we've been here for 5 years, starting in 2014, September 2014. So on the 15th, we're going to celebrate that together. We're going to talk about some of our original core values and life patterns and how we live out who we are. Should be a great time in the fall to reflect on that. We're going to have a baptism on September 22nd, that Sunday. We're figuring out a way to do it in service. Okay, so probably involves some sort of horse trough, but it'll be clean, of course. Probably bought new and never used for a horse, because that's kind of weird. But anyway, we're going to figure out some way to do that. My daughter will be getting baptized. Again, we've said that we announced this before, but if you're interested in getting baptized and you never have, please come talk to me or Steve, one of the pastors, and let us know, and we'll kind of walk you through that process, and maybe you'll have the opportunity to get baptized on September 22nd, that Sunday, as well. The Emmys party will be going on. Lots of things coming up in September. Community group starting up again. So good stuff to look forward to. If you're an LAUSD parent or child, then you're starting school on Tuesday. So blessings to all the families starting up and everyone else that is as well. Well, we have been going through a summer series looking at different characters, different heroes, different villains, and us as well, and how those people relate to us. And so this time we're coming up to a guy named Herod, one of the Herods. Turns out there were a lot of Herods. We're going to look at a guy named Herod Antipas, look at his fascination, but not the faith that he had with Jesus. So as I said before, we're in the final hours of Jesus' earthly ministry before he would die on the cross. Luke 23, verses 6 through 16 is what we're going to look at today. If you want to pick up a Bible, you can find that. Luke is the third book of the New Testament, the third a gospel as well, in order anyway, in the New Testament. The scripture will be behind me as well here. There's a link at the bottom of your bulletin, as always, if you want to put it into your smartphone. So this is Luke chapter 23, verse 6 through 16. When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at the time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he had heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. So he questioned him at some length, but he made no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. And Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then, arraying him in splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day. For before this, they had been at enmity with each other. Pilate then called together the chief priests and the rulers of the people and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who is misleading the people. And after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty or any of your charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserves death has been done by him. I will therefore punish and release him." This is the word of the Lord. Well, I am one who is, if we're talking about fascination, fascinated by polls. I like data. I don't know why. If any of you have done Strength Finders tests before for kind of gifting tests in workplaces and things, one of my highest ones is information, which essentially means I like footnotes. Like, I like as much info as I can about anything. If a footnote is more information about the thing I'm reading, great, give me more footnotes. I regularly in the car, we're driving by somewhere and see something that I've never heard of, and I ask Alicia, would you look that up on Wikipedia or something? I want to learn about this. And she rolls her eyes at me and goes, why do you care about these things? But I do. I'm a weirdo, so I enjoy data. And one of the things that I find fascinating is polling or information about kind of the spiritual or moral climate of our country, or certainly if we're talking about Los Angeles, since we are here in LA. When you look at surveys that are related to Jesus specifically in what people feel about him, there actually is a lot of fascination, even today in 2019, with Jesus himself. While people, especially in Los Angeles, have certain feelings about, if you ask for, say, evangelicals, and a lot of times negative connotations come with associating with that group of people, especially in more progressive areas here. Well, when you look at Jesus, it's actually very different. Some of you may have heard of Barna Research before. They're a great Christian research organization that polls and finds information, really wealth of resources for understanding where people are at. They did a study just a few years ago and concluded when you ask in the last 5 years, 92% of Americans, for instance, believe that Jesus Christ was a real person who actually lived. Here is one of those polls. You can see, typically, the younger you get, and going into millennials, you'll see that number decreases. But still, 87% of people believe Jesus was a real person who actually lived 2,000 years ago. Drilling down further into some other data, when asked to fill in the statement, I believe Jesus was either God, only a spiritual leader, or not sure, 56% of all adult Americans said they believe he's God. Over half of Americans believe Jesus was actually God himself come to earth. You can find the other data. I could send this study out later, and you could read all the information. Again, if you're like me, you're like, slow down on the charts. I want to see all the charts. I like charts. Anyway, again, you're getting an insight into my life. Lastly, the last one we'll look at today. When asked to affirm or deny this statement, I've made a personal commitment to Jesus Christ that is still important in my life today, 62% of all adult Americans answered in the affirmative. Again, that drops off to 46% the younger you get, looking at millennials. But still, for the most part, the numbers are steady across annual income and across ethnicity, save for Black Americans, where there's a whopping 80% in the affirmative for that statement. It seems, even in 2019, even in particularly progressive cities like ours, there can be a lot of fascination, even sometimes commitment to Jesus. Sometimes, as a Christian pastor, especially in a place like LA, I often wish it was easier to separate attitudes that people have towards organized Christianity or towards quote-unquote evangelicalism itself from attitudes people have towards Jesus. Because I would always much rather talk about Jesus, his claims, his life, his words, his deeds, than I would the perceived attitudes or actions of collective evangelicalism. And I'm guessing you're probably a lot like me as well if you're a follower of Jesus in here. But with so much fascination about Jesus, even in our modern city today, it begs the question, what is Jesus looking for from people who approach him, who come to him? If you're in here and you're not a follower of Jesus, you may wonder, what would he require of me? Is fascination enough? Is positive thoughts enough? Is it doing certain things that he tells me to do? What is it that changes us if we come to Jesus? And for those who are committed followers, who are committed Christians, how should we view real faith? And how can we make sure that we're not putting our hopes in the gifts that Jesus brings us instead of in Jesus himself? In our story today, we encounter one of the Herods. We'll learn which Herod, a guy named Herod Antipas, to be exact. He is excited to meet Jesus. He is greatly fascinated by him. But Jesus gives him absolutely nothing that he actually wants. Why? Here's our key takeaway today, and we'll find out why. Herod Antipas was fascinated with Jesus, wanting his power more than wanting him. But faith in Jesus is wanting Jesus himself. Let me read that again because it has a lot of nuance to it. Herod Antipas, who we will see today, was fascinated with Jesus, wanting his power more than wanting him. But faith in Jesus is wanting Jesus himself. So, as I said already, we're jumping into the very end of Jesus' ministry, which is why we're in the last few chapters of Luke here. So that means all the miracles that we have seen, all the teaching that we have seen about Jesus. Again, we haven't looked at it this series, but you can imagine if you've been to church before, or you know most of the stories, all the ministry has led up essentially to this moment in these last 24 hours of Jesus' earthly life. The Last Supper is over. The prayers in the Garden of Gethsemane are over. He has been betrayed by Judas. He has been captured by the Romans. He was led to a show trial before the Jewish Sanhedrin, or the chief priests and elders, as they are referred to here. They have accused him of blasphemy. They have appealed to Pilate, the Roman authority, and the only one capable of executing Jesus at this point in history. They are trying to end Jesus' life. They claim he is stirring up riots against Caesar. He is a threat to the empire, that he is claiming to be a king. But the problem is, Pilate can't find him guilty of anything. So we start out today in verse 6. We see that once Pilate learns Jesus is from the region of Galilee, where Nazareth is, where he grew up as a child, Pilate sees an opportunity with this crowd that is angry at Jesus, but he finds no guilt. He finds an opportunity. Oh, someone else could take over this problem. He's from Galilee. That is the authority, under the authority of Herod Antipas, one of the Jewish leaders at that time. Herod was a tetrarch over Galilee and Perea, depending on how you pronounce it. But because of the gospel authors always refer to him simply as Herod, and there are lots of times that Herod is referred to, we need to understand who exactly this is. Most of us, probably because we're familiar with the Christmas story, or if you're not, you may have still heard of Herod before, but when we hear Herod, probably think of the Jewish king who attempted to kill Jesus as an infant when he was born in Bethlehem, forcing Joseph and Mary to flee as refugees with baby Jesus into Egypt to avoid their son being put to death. That Herod, though, was very old at the time of the Christmas story, at the time of Jesus' birth. And that Herod was very near his own death. He is known in history as Herod the Great because he did incredible building and development and relatively peaceful rule during his period in Jerusalem. He is the one responsible for the Jerusalem temple being built to its most extravagant level ever. In fact, that temple, which was the temple in Jesus' day, the Western Wall, called the Wailing Wall, if you were to go to Jerusalem today, still stands. That's how incredible the building of Herod's temple was. Herod ruled over all of Palestine as a close Roman ally under his authority. He wasn't technically Jewish. He was actually part of a kind of half Jewish group, and so often he was looked at with great kind of off-puttingness by the Jewish people. They didn't fully like what he was doing, even though he developed a lot of great things. But he had 3 sons by many different wives called Archelaus, Philip, and Antipas. All of these took the name Herod. So you'll see that if you look throughout the Gospels and throughout the book of Acts, you'll see Herod Archelaus, Herod Philip, and Herod Antipas. Antipas is the Herod who is most often alive during Jesus' ministry and most often referred to other than during the Christmas story at the beginning. You can see in the red area, that's the area that Herod Antipas ruled. The green area at the time by Jesus' trial was mainly under Roman, all of it was under Roman authority, but Pilate was specifically over that area by that time. So Herod Antipas is the one responsible for beheading John the Baptist, if you're familiar with that story. That's recorded earlier in the Gospels. John the Baptist had been calling out Herod Antipas and his wife because Herod's wife was previously his brother's wife. And they went to Rome together and had a little retreat and ended up divorcing their respective spouses and then married each other. John the Baptist came along and said that's called adultery. God isn't a fan of that. Herod's wife then was not a fan of him and asked him, if you remember the story, to bring John the Baptist's head on a platter, and Herod Antipas obliged her. On another run-in with Herod, we find take place in Luke chapter 13. This is the only time, other than what we see today that Jesus himself speaks of Herod Antipas. It takes place in Luke chapter 13, verse 31. Luke says there, "At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to him, 'Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you.'" This is Jesus' response to them. "Go tell that fox, behold, I cast out demons before him curses today and tomorrow, and the third day I will finish my course." So perhaps Herod Antipas, would have been well acquainted with Jesus, because Jesus' ministry was very famous by this time. Perhaps the word came along that, hey, did you hear? Jesus called you a fox. and that would have gotten to him, and who knows what he would have thought about that. Herod, for his part, Antipas ruled for 43 years, again, under relative peace in his area. But after a new Roman emperor came along, Antipas's nephew, a guy named Agrippa, who you will see in the book of Acts, became the new Jewish king and ruler. And Agrippa convinced the emperor to banish Antipas, his uncle, and under charges of sedition, which were probably false. And therefore, Herod Antipas lived out his days in exile in Lyons. So, back we come into Jesus' trial here in Luke 23. That's some background on who Herod is. Herod Antipas is delighted at this point to meet Jesus. Who is this, to him, an apparent miracle worker who dared to call him at some point that fox? See how Luke describes Herod's fascination in verse 8. He says he was very glad to see him, for he'd long desired to see him, hoping to see a sign done by him. Herod begins to question Jesus, right? To ask him what his deal is. He perhaps heard that Jesus, by this point, had fed 5,000 plus people, probably greater than 10,000, since they only counted adult men usually at that time, with just a few loaves of bread and just a couple fish. Perhaps he heard that Jesus healed the diseased, healed the demon-possessed, commanded spiritual evil forces, even apparently raised some people from the dead, including a little girl and a guy named Lazarus. He probably had heard this impressive list of miracles that Jesus had done. Maybe he even heard he's a ruler, probably had access to a lot of fine foods. Maybe he himself was a person that liked the little red wine. He perhaps heard, look, Jesus was at this wedding in Cana, and everyone got drunk on all the wine, and it was gone by that time, and they ran out of wine, and all of a sudden, Jesus produced some really good wine. And maybe Herod's like, hey, I could find some sort of business here that we could make profit. So he is interested to figure out and to see Jesus do some sort of miracle. Maybe Herod thinks, well, surely Jesus will want to curry my favor, and so I'll be able to see him perform in power. If you lived in ancient Palestine at that time, you too would have heard of Jesus' miracles. To believe that they happened, you would have either had to see them with your own eyes, which only happened for a certain number of people, but most people knew about Jesus' miracles because they heard about it from reliable eyewitness testimony. It's the same for us today, isn't it? We have to believe in reliable testimony of people telling us the miracles that Jesus did. We primarily look to the writers of the New Testament for that evidence. And when we study that evidence, the eyewitnesses who saw these miracles themselves, we are able to then believe ourselves in the miracles that he has done. The greatest miracle, of course, is yet to come in the story when there will be an empty tomb 3 days from the point of this trial. Many people come when they think about Jesus, when they check out Jesus today. They come just like Herod. They come because they've heard he can do great things in your life, or he has great power. Many hear that Jesus has changed lives and that he transforms hearts. Some hear that he brings incredible healing. I can share stories of my own that are pretty incredible in that realm. Some, like we saw last week with the suffering woman and the little girl. Some come because they are impressed by who his followers are. Doesn't always happen. Again, we talked about the reputation that some groups of Christians have nowadays. But some people still come because they see a big crowd going somewhere. That was one of the reasons I started to go down a path of following Jesus, because I went to college. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. There was a Christian group on campus that was really welcoming, really kind. And I said, these people aren't weird. And I started spending time with them. And that's one of the ways I got to know who Jesus was and the story of the good news. Some people come because there's an amazing band that they hear sometime. There are flashy teachers sometimes. They promise prosperity. They promise peace. They promise freedom. Some people come to Jesus because there's a huge crowd. That happens probably less so here in somewhere like LA, but there are some parts of America still today where the majority of people go to church or do on a regular basis or grew up going to church. There are still some places that amaze me once I get outside of LA. I went to a conference one time in Texas. I think I've told this before, in Dallas. And we went to one gargantuan, like mega church, like huge church that I think their lawn budget was probably more than our entire year budget. They had a statue of Jesus. Yes, a statue of Jesus in the front of their church. And across the street, which was Dallas, so it's like a whole mile to see across to the other side. Across the street was another 10,000 plus member church right across the street from one another. There are places like that where a lot of people come, check out Jesus, think about following him because it's very normal and a lot of other people do. Like our fascination with avocado toast here in Los Angeles, where every restaurant in the world now has avocado toast on the breakfast menu. Some people come because kind of everyone is doing it. None of that is inherently wrong. But look how Jesus responds to Herod's fascination. Verse 9. So he questioned him at some length, but Jesus made no answer. Why does Jesus not tell him who he is? Why not call him to faith in God? Why not call him to repentance and to turn and to trust in the God who he says he follows? Why not perform some miracle so Herod will believe and go, you truly are who these people say you are? We ask another version of that today, don't we, sometimes? Sometimes people say, I know there are times and versions of this in my own life, but sometimes people say things like, God, if you're real, why don't you show up and make yourself plain to everyone? Especially people I love and care for. Why don't you just make yourself obvious to people? Jesus, if you're the truth, if you're the one God, if you really rose from the dead, why not, write it in the sky every 5 minutes, like all over the world? And so, Jesus is the truth. Every language can be in the clouds, whatever. Why not make it plain everywhere that we go? Why not appear again visibly so that people can see you? He did that at times in the New Testament, appeared to Paul on the road to Damascus. Why not do that more today so more people will know you? For one, at least in Herod's case, we could probably apply this to us at times, Jesus knew what was in Herod's heart. For the poor, for the desperate, for those who understand their brokenness, for those who know the darkness of their own hearts, for those who know they cannot fix themselves, Jesus comes quickly to make himself known, to give an answer to them, to be near to them. Some of those beautiful stories take place one-on-one with Jesus. I think of the woman at the well in John chapter 4. She's a woman who is out there in the middle of the day, in the heat of the day, which probably means there was bad stuff going on, and she was an outcast, and she could only go at certain times of the day. She had had tons of husbands and probably been someone who society didn't look at much. And Jesus sat down one-on-one with her. She had an incredible encounter with him. But Herod is not one of those type of people. Herod is wealthy. He's confident, not desperate for anyone or anything. He's not broken, but he's proud, believing that he's a pretty great leader, most likely. He's a very important person. Surely Jesus will perform for me. I have the power to take his life at some level. Herod doesn't see a need to fix himself at all, most likely. To those kind of people, Jesus will not perform. He won't do it back then. He won't do it today. If you think you have everything together, this doesn't matter if you're more conservative, you're more traditional, you're more progressive, you're more kind of do whatever you feel like. If you think there is nothing wrong with you, nothing that needs to be fixed, and you got it all together, Jesus won't be of much use to you. He can't be. That's why in verse 9, it says here, Jesus gave him no answer. Herod wants Jesus to come to him and satisfy him on his terms, but he doesn't want Jesus himself. He wants Jesus to be convenient for his life in his timing to do what he wants him to do. He doesn't want to bend his knee to Jesus and Jesus' agenda and his kingdom. Herod wants to be king, as he is sort of a puppet king in some realm, but he wants to be in charge. He doesn't want Jesus to be king and be in charge of his life. He doesn't want to give himself so that Jesus is his one and only king. If you're a Christian here today, at some point you realized your own spiritual poverty. You realized at some point you can't become a follower of Jesus without it, going, I can't save myself. At some level, I am desperate for him. I need his amazing grace that we sang about. You've made him your true king at some level. But even if you're a committed follower of Jesus here today, we must always guard our hearts, that we do not turn from Jesus himself for who he is, what he's done, to going for what he brings to us. Faith in Jesus is not faith which merely comes to him because of the community that he brings, because of the family of God he brings around us. So we get to call ourselves brothers and sisters. We're part of a family of God. It doesn't come to him primarily because of the peace that he brings, because of the forgiveness that he brings, which is incredible. Even perhaps because of the glorious future that he brings. Faith in Jesus, which is different from fascination like Herod's, is one that sticks close to Jesus himself. Remembering that he is the reason for the community that we have. He is the one that unites us as a family of God under one Father. He is our peace and the reason we have hope. He is the one who purchased our forgiveness. And he's the one who will lead us in a glorious future. All those things ultimately will mean nothing if Jesus isn't wonderful, if Jesus isn't beautiful, if Jesus isn't gracious, if Jesus isn't forever kind. What good would it be if Jesus was a monster to spend eternity with him and have forgiveness from him? But if he's wonderful, if it is good news to have him, then to have his peace, to have his forgiveness, and to be led by him for all eternity, to bow the knee to him as our King, is truly the best thing in all the world. So check your heart. Think about this on a regular basis. Is the ultimate reason you come to church on Sundays, the reason you run to the scriptures to read them or don't read them, is the reason you ultimately serve and seek to bless those who are around you, those in our community, the ultimate reason you pray and make requests of Jesus? think about, is the ultimate reason I do those things because I want the one, the only one, who does them all. He is what will ultimately make heaven and the new earth so wonderful. Don't forget that as you live out the daily aspects of our faith. Our calling is to be like the disciples. After so many people had left Jesus, the scripture we just read together, I want to read it again because it's so profound. At some point, you will encounter this with Jesus. All of us who have walked with him know this. Some point, you'll read something, you'll hear something that is totally from the scriptures, that is sound with biblical teaching. And you'll come up like this group in John chapter 6, and you'll go, that is a difficult teaching. Jesus comes along, as we say this a lot of times, Jesus comes along and says, die to yourself. Serve others, always. Love, not just those who love you, love your enemies. And then he defines it with a story like the Good Samaritan, someone that the locals of his day would have seen as wicked and evil and beyond redemption. And Jesus says, go be like that person. At some point, you will come and walk with Jesus and go, that is a hard thing, Jesus. May our response be like the 12 disciples when Jesus says, do you want to go away as well as those people who left? And they say to him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. And we have believed and we have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. Where else can we go? You're it. That's the place Jesus wants to get each of our hearts. So that's the first reason. Jesus knew Herod's heart. He knows everyone's hearts and what we really want when we approach him. But second is a much bigger reason. There's another reason Jesus did not answer Herod. In some ways, it has absolutely nothing to do with Herod's particular fascination with Jesus and wanting to see him perform for him and do a miracle with his lack of real, true faith. In another sense, though, this reason has everything to do with Herod's lack of faith and has everything to do with us and our need as well. You see, if Jesus had answered Herod, if Jesus had performed a miracle to get himself out of this show trial that he was in, his impending execution, Jesus knew what was coming and awaited him on the cross. It would have been exceedingly easy for the Son of God to pew, 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 take some angels out, lightning comes out, he frees himself super easily. That's exactly how lightning coming out of Jesus' hand sounds like. If Jesus had done that, if he'd gotten himself out of the situation, if he performed exactly what Herod was looking for, then his greatest miracle could never have been completed. By Jesus staying silent before Herod, he became mocked by Herod. He took on shame upon himself, shame that we deserve, shame that he did not deserve. And then, of course, Herod forced him to go back to Pilate. What transpires after that starts in verse 14. Pilate says, I did not find this man guilty or of any of the charges you have laid against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done to him. So I will punish him and release him. Isn't that amazing, by the way? He's done nothing wrong, so I'm going to punish him, and then I'll release him later. But upon Herod and Pilate testifying that Jesus is completely innocent and that he is then going to eventually release him, the religious leaders cry out in outrage. In just a depressing, sad, ironic, tragic twist of events, the religious leaders demand Barabbas is freed instead of Jesus. Barabbas was an insurrectionist and a murderer. And they say, give us him, kill Jesus. And Jesus is then Eventually, when Pilate sees no other way out, under the unrelenting pressure from the religious leaders, delivers Jesus over. And later that day, he will die on the cross. Pilate didn't know when he relented and handed him over. Herod didn't know when he demanded a sign, demanded a miracle, and Jesus stayed silent and wouldn't perform for him. The religious leaders didn't know when they shouted in rage for Jesus to be crucified and for them to get a murderer back instead of the Son of God. They didn't know until that first Easter Sunday that all these steps had to happen. That Pilate, that Herod, that the religious leaders, and even us could then have a chance at salvation. If Jesus performed for Herod, if he freed himself from the unjust religious leaders, or he showed Pilate his true glory as the true king of the universe, he would never have what we can have today. Because of the cross, because he took on our shame, because he took on the wrath of God that we deserved for our ignorance, for our lack of faith, for our fear. Because he did all that, and because he rose from the dead, we can now have Jesus himself. Not just his gifts, not just the blessings he brings, not just the community that we have, but we get him, we get the forgiveness, we get the adoption into God's family, we become brothers and sisters of one another, and we will experience his goodness together with him forever and ever and ever. Do not just be fascinated by Jesus today. Put your faith in him. Let's pray. Father, we have so many pictures. This whole series, we've been able to see so many different types of people. People who have great power, people who, like Herod, people who, like the little girl last week who was on her deathbed and then passed away, who were small and seemingly insignificant. People like Daniel, who were great officials in a government. People like Nebuchadnezzar, who were kings of the entire ancient world. All of them different. All of them, in some way, us in some measure. We're all different. We all have our own stories, our own fears, our own sins, our own struggles. God, help us, no matter who we are. Help us to see ways that we may just tend to be fascinated by Jesus. We might like what the byproducts that he may bring us. Help us to see you as you truly are. Because God, it's better than everything else. It's better than even all the gifts that you can bring. To have a parent who gives great gifts at Christmas are better than all the Christmas gifts they can give. To have the relationship with you as our God is better than anything else. Teach us to see that. Teach us to see and to put our faith in you. Teach us to be like the disciples who say, where else can we go? You have the words of eternal life. Thank you, Lord, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.